Hello, today we're going to do some puzzles. So I'm going to try and do a few puzzles. This one is black to play and win. Generally speaking, they're always to win, so to find the best moves for black. So obviously the first thing you look at are checks and captures, right? When you're calculating, bishop f2 is clearly a move that you would think about, but then they made a king, so is that good? It might not be. There's also ideas like rook takes d3. When they take, you can play with like rook f8 is possible. That might well be the solution actually. So at the moment, first thing you also look at the position. So at the moment, white is material ahead. However, the downside of white's position is they are getting attacked. So I have quite very active pieces. At the moment I'm like a lot of pawns down actually. I'm actually 4 pawns down, which is quite a lot. But as I said before, I've got a legitimate attack. So I could start off with taking and going rook f8. Now if you were to move the queen back to d2 for example, then I would take on f3. If you move the queen to e4, then I think knight f2 might be strong. So I'll probably start with this move. Okay, so now the question is, do I take on f2 immediately? I think knight f2 you have moves like king g2, right? So I'm going to try this move. Okay, so that was actually fairly straightforward, that one. Right, next puzzle. So again, you're looking at checks and captures. Now, subconsciously you dismiss a lot of checks. I'm going to dismiss that one. I don't really need to calculate it, think about it very much, because obviously it's not a good move. You're going to take that. I don't need to think about queen c1 subconsciously, but I do need to think about moves like knight a3 because that is a reasonable check, right? What is white threatening? White is actually threatening knight e6 mate, checkmate, immediately, which is quite a dangerous threat. Now if I were to check and then take on b5, I would be temporarily at least material up. You do have knight e6 check anyway, so knight a3, let's say you can't go to a1 because of queen c3 mate, so you have to go to b2. Now if I then take on b5, you could take that with a knight, or you could possibly go knight e6 king d7 and then think about some move like queen g4, but that would probably fail to queen c3 check followed by queen c2. So something like knight a3 king b2 knight b5 knight e6 king d7 queen g4 queen c3 check, king b1, queen c2 check, king a1, queen c3 check, king b1, knight a3 mate. However, after knight a3, king b2, queen c3, so there's also queen c3, yeah. So knight a3, king b2, knight b5, knight b5. Is there anything there for me? Possibly not. So I'm going to start with knight a3. Knight a3 looks like the way, right? So the question is now, we've identified 2 reasonable looking candidate moves. One of them is also queen c3. The queen c3 is a move you would look at because it's a forcing move, right? It's a check. So you should always look at forcing moves when you're playing, because, or when you're trying to solve studies, because you know it's easier to calculate that line. It's easier to calculate that line. You go through the lines you can fundamentally dismiss, or you go to first, because that simplifies your calculate. The point of that is to simplify your calculation process. So after knight a, queen c3, queen c3, king c1. There's also, I can't go queen a1 because the knight takes a1. However, I do have other moves. For example, I could take on b5 there, similar, and then if knight b5 is already different, so I'm not seeing a massive difference, right? There's also rook takes c2 here, but I'm sort of doubting whether that's the answer, to be honest. Because after knight takes, you still got check, but then king c1. So I feel like probably knight b5 is favourite. Let's just think about this a little bit more. So queen c3, king c1. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any... What's my move after knight b5? So I need to know what my move is after knight b5. Knight b5, knight b5. What is my big follow-up? Again, when you study, you know... The difference to the study... If I had this in real life... Let's say I had this position over the board, which is quite a legitimate possibility. I wouldn't know that it's necessarily winning. But here I know that there's a win, so it's worth investing the time to work out exactly what the win is. So queen c3, king c1. What is the actual killer move there? I don't see a killer move. You could take and then be the queen, say, to c6, but again, don't see anything special. So after knight b5, there's also moves like a4. Possibly strong, but then say if you went to d4, why is that winning? I don't see exactly why it's winning. I kind of feel like I'm missing something important here. Wait a sec, there's also e5, knight e6, king e7. Might be strong. Because if you take on f8... then maybe rook c2 is crushing, right? So I might try e5 because I can't see anything better. Right, maybe it was e5 then, yeah? Okay, because basically I used process of elimination. None of the other moves worked. So then I identified another candidate move. So by process of elimination that had to be the move because that, you know, nothing else worked. Okay, so here... I could take on g4, knight e2, bishop e5, queen d7, takes, king e2, win my material. So I think here's quite a simple one. You simply take here. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, one idea I'm looking at is you're looking at some way of checking here. So one idea I'm looking at is rook c6. Because then I get to check on e5, so that looks very tempting. However, is that the correct solution? It might not be. Well, given I don't see anything else, I feel like it must be rook takes c6. So I'm going to try rook takes c6. And now my idea is to follow up. So queen e5, king g6, f5 check, and if you take on g5, I go f6 and take on e7. So again, you should always identify checks and captures. This is a check. So again, I could look at knight takes e6, but this is the most forcing move. So probably likely to be the strongest move because it's a very forcing move. If you go here, I've got ideas like f6, which look incredibly strong. There's lots of ideas. If you take there, then f6 is winning. So I'll try f5. Again, I'm looking at moves that are the most forcing moves. Like f6 is the most forcing move, right? However, there is maybe a possible defence. If f6, the knight d7, does actually defend. I think after knight d7, you could take on e7, knight e5, knight f7 check. Take on h8. Maybe that's winning, but then you can move the knight back to g6. So... not 100% on that one. Is there anything else here? So f6, knight d7. There's also queen e3 there, which looks very strong. I'm sort of doubting knight d7 as a defence, but I can't quite see... I mean, take on e6 also looks very promising because you're threatening knight f7. So it's quite hard, but the problem is you can take on g5, right? So that's one way to falsify a variation. If I take there, you're going to take, which is quite a simple defence. It'd be easy to overlook. You simply take the knight. So I'm going to try that move. That's actually wrong. So I did get one wrong. Maybe it's queen e3. No, it's not queen e3. It's not that move either, is it? Maybe it's just this. Oh dear, completely. So really bad calculation, mummy. I thought f6 was winning, but maybe knight d7 is defending. It can't be queen e6. Knight f7 doesn't look right. No. So what is this? Maybe it's just h4. No, that's weird. So it's not knight e6. It's not f6. Maybe rook lift. Wow, not even a move I considered, which is careless because queen g5, rook h3 is winning, right? Because if queen h5, then queen f4 check. So if we look at that f6 move, I think the problem was knight d7. Yeah, it's actually a very serious defence, and I did see knight d7, but I assumed there must be a good move, but clearly assuming is not enough. You need to know, so that's something I need to work on in my calculation. So it's a good way actually to work out what you need to fix in your calculation. I assumed that knight d7, I saw knight d7, I mentioned that, but I assumed that there was something good. Well, there wasn't. You can't assume something, you really need to be certain. Okay, so knight e6. Okay, so the first move I'm looking at is just taking a knight. What's wrong with that? Oh, there, bishop g6 and rook f7. Okay, so that's no good. I can't take the knight. So, okay, at least that's good. I made some progress in the puzzle. I've identified that I can't take the knight. So now we move on to other moves. Queen e2 looks very promising because after rook f2 there's queen g4 and then you take the knight with a queen potentially. Although they do have an irritating bishop f5 move at the end, so even there it's not 100% certain. However, I'm not seeing anything else unless... Well, there's also moves like rook h5 maybe, but I feel like it must be queen e2. Okay, so wait, so obviously you would feel it can't be queen h5 because knight g7. So it must be the check. Okay, let's just be super careful here though, because there is a potential defense with... I think this is a trap, and they want me to take with the queen, and then they're going to unleash bishop f5 on me, which is actually serious counterplay. Because where do you move the queen? If you go queen e7, 8 of e6, I think it's rook h5, and then I'm threatening rook h1, and a huge attack. I think this is a big trap. They want me to take the knight, and then bishop f5 is like will land. This is very easy to. This is why a lot of people mess up, even players like myself. You know, I'm a GM, experienced player. You go to a line too quickly. You assume it's right. You don't bother to check it. I think it's now. I'm certain it's rook h5. Oh no, hang on. Rook h5 they can take and take on. No, I'm not so certain now. No. You see, this is why you need to be very thorough, because rook h5. What I missed was knight g7, knight h5, which is quite a serious blow actually. Now, does it make any difference if I check on h3 first? If I check on h3 and then they go, let's say king e2, and then you take bishop, well, maybe bishop f5. Okay, so let's work out if there's a win after queen e6, bishop f5, queen e7, e6. Oh wait, if I check on h3 first, and when you go e6 at the end, the pawn is pinned maybe against king. So if I went check, let's say you went king e2, I took bishop f5, queen e7, e6, and I castled. Although you would have rook d7, right? And then if I take, you take with a queen. Not so clear, right? Interesting. Yes, this e6 stuff that's really giving me the heebie-jeebies. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is pretty difficult. Actually, it's also a check, but if you go to e2, there's queen h5, and then take with a pawn, and then you no longer have bishop e6. So I think it is queen h3. Yeah. Yeah, because there's all this extra stuff. If I'd have gone, let's say, if I'd have gone here immediately, you had bishop f5. That's a very serious move. Yeah, it's actually winning for white. So all these little differences make a big difference. If I go rook here, you have knight g7 and you're winning. Well, you're not winning, but yeah, it's not nowhere near as good. Right, so let's go to the next one. So this is white to play and win. Okay, first idea I'm looking at is maybe to take. Because if you take back, then I have knight g4. But the problem with knight g4, maybe it's a bit slow because you have d4 at the end, right? A d4, knight f6, king f6, ed4, you could run to e7, and I'm a rook down. There's also ideas like knight d7 here. If knight d7, bishop d7, bishop f6, g6, maybe something like queen h5 is winning, threatening queen h7. There's also knight g4. I think it might be knight d7 because that's like the most forcing move. If knight g4, you have other options, but knight d7, I don't think you have many options. We'll try knight d7. Well, now it's just simply knight f6, right? Yep, so I got to 2700. This is not bad. This is like my nightmare, which is king and pawn endings. I hate king and pawn endings. Because I feel like a lot of normal chess is pattern recognition, but somehow king and pawn endings, you don't have pattern recognition. I feel like pattern recognition is a strength of mine. But king and pawn endgames are a weakness, really, of mine, I feel, because there's nothing to really guide you. It's always like you really have to actually put in the grind and calculate it. There's no like... There are some slight kind of memory patterns and stuff, but it's... Okay, anyway, I'm babbling. There's interesting moves here like h4, but the idea, if you move the king, say king d3, I could go g4, hg, f3, take h3. If I go g4 immediately, is there anything wrong with that? Don't see anything wrong, but maybe you just go at h4. But then if f3 takes gf, king e3. Yeah, I think after h4 I can go g3, right? And then if you move the king, say c3, you go king e5, king d3, f5, ef, king takes. So if g4, there's also hg, hg. Again, you can move the king. There's also moves at a5. I don't know if they change anything. I think you just take after a5. So I think it's between g4 or h4. And normally in these situations, when I zig, I should zag. So I really need to crunch through here and try and get to... So h4, king d3, king e5 seems to be good. But once if you go king c3, king e5, king d3, f5 takes, king takes. It might just come down to intuition, right? I mean, g4 was my first gut instinct, but then I saw this idea of going h4. I mean, to be honest, they both look winning, but obviously one is winning and the other one isn't, right? So what is the winning move? So white. So basically, the way I should use calculation is to try and work out which one isn't winning. But how do I do that? Oh, hang on. There's some ideas where when I go f5 and take on the king later, I'm missing the fact that white has d6 of counterplay. I'm missing that idea. So let's try h4 again, because if king d3 then g4, how do you beat a problem like that? You could go king e2, and then if f3 takes gh, king h2, that seems okay for white. So h4, king d3, but then king e5, right? So if h4, king d3, then king e5, I think is winning. Oh no, but then you can still go to e2 maybe. Oh, but then maybe I go f5 and then take on d5. I take on d5, right? This is the whole point. So I'll try h4. Okay, it's g4. I think the idea is you go here and then you take on d5. This is the point, yeah. So why was my h4 idea wrong? Ah, I didn't see this idea going here, which is really careless. So that was poor. You see, I told you my weakness is king of pawn endings. I'm very, very bad at king of pawn endings. This is my weakness in chess. So my first gut instinct is queen e4. Queen e4 is screaming out. It just looks such an obvious move. It's a shame that last one because my first gut instinct was g4. But I overthought it. Didn't see this idea of going e5. So that was bad. So queen e4, king a7, queen a7, sorry, king c7. I don't see how queen a7 helps you. So queen e4. That really threatens a lot, right? I don't really see a defense. Maybe I'm missing something after queen e4. I must be missing something quite subtle after queen e4, but I'm going to try queen e4. Aha, that move I missed. Obviously I was looking at counter-attacking ideas. I'm not looking at defensive moves. Right, that's a clever defense. Okay, so what do we do now? Now we could play a move like knight e5 because that threatens the knight. Sorry, the bishop. Also threatens queen g2, but then they go f3. So it might not be knight e5 because f3 seems to be a problem. However, there's a very simple move here, which is knight g5. So again, you look for checks and captures. The most simple move is knight g5 check. Because it's not the only check. I could also check here. I could check here. But knight g5, if you take it, I've got... Oh, but hang on. Then you run to h4. So even that's not so simple, right? At first I thought the knight g5 was game over, but then you take. However, there's also ideas like queen g2, king h4. I'll try knight g5. Okay, they do look like the most obvious move. So queen g2, king h4. Okay, can I carry on with the checks? Queen h2, bishop g2, rook f4 check, gf4, queen f4, not king h5 because of queen g5 mate, but bishop g4, queen h2, bishop h3, that seems to be a perpetual check. So queen g2, king h4, there's also hg. Well, I'm flushing your king out, right? Because after king g5, I haven't got queen d5 though, which is important because of queen on a2. So the other move, which is possible, is hg5. There's also queen h2, king h4, queen g2, king h4, queen h2, bishop h3, and simply take on g5. Might be very strong because if king g5, there's queen h3. That does look winning because your king is just too exposed. You're not going to survive that in the long run. So I'll start with a check. Okay, now bishop f3. Oh, okay, again, very clever because bishop f3, then I'm exposing my king a little bit, right? But I think I can still get away with bishop f3, king g5, queen h3, queen a7, king c8. Because if queen a6 is bishop b7. So I'll start with a check. And now I've got king c8. They're just giving up the queen, right? But now the rook is 8. Well, I should have seen that line, actually. I should have seen that line. It's quite a tricky... but it was quite simple in a way because a lot of it was forcing, right? Okay, so I think I've even seen this one before, to be honest. This looks familiar. I mean, Queen C2 is appealing to me as a candidate move. Right, now, if I go Rook F2, what am I actually threatening? I'm threatening... If Rook F2, I'm threatening Rook checks and... Queen F2, mate. Is there any way that they could possibly defend? I don't see... Oh, they could go King G1 here. And then if Rook F2... Rook H2, sorry. So Rook F2, King G1, Rook H2... Does Queen... this moves like Rook F1? Potentially. I don't know if that's saving them. Is there anything else other than... I mean, there's moves like Queen C3 here, but Rook F2, you normally want to put your Rook on the 7th. So of course they go into G1. That's the only realistic defence. Aha, there's E4, but then they go Queen E H5. So I can dismiss E4 because E4 is a good try. But the problem is then they take and then they have lots of checks. I have to come back to F8 or something. So E4 I can dismiss. Sometimes it's better off doing it in your head than staring at the board. For some reason, I don't know why. If Rook H2, then Rook F1. If Rook H3 there's also Rook H3 there. So assume after Rook H... Oh, there's also got Queen F3 as well, actually, after Rook H2. So probably won't be Rook H2. Interesting. So what moves... This is actually pretty tricky, this one. There's Rook D2, but then they go Queen E5, right? Threatening Queen H5. Ah, but then you can go... Then you can go Rook G2 and you're winning. But after Rook D2, they go Queen F3, I think. So that's quite tricky. So you got to this position. Even getting to this position wasn't that straightforward. You got to this position, and it's still tough to win, right? But this is why I feel like with all chess players, they need to train their calculation. You need to get used to thinking about variations. You know, do Puzzle Storm, do Puzzle Rush. You know, play lots of Blitz online. That will train your calculation. And do these kind of more sophisticated puzzles as well. And, you know, gradually your calculation will improve. I mean, one move which might be very strong here, although it looks very slow, is Queen E2. Now, the idea behind Queen E2 is White simply doesn't have any realistic counterplay in the long term. If they go Rook D1, threatening Queen D3 check, you can then play... even Rook F3 actually is very strong, I think. Or E4. So I think Queen E2 is like the sort of like the portcullis move where you're shutting a door on White. So if you were White in this position, you're desperately hoping from it like Rook H2 allowing you Queen F3. You're desperately hoping from it like E4, but Queen E2 is like the sort of you know, what's the term? You know, party pooper move, because they realistically have no move then. Because Queen E2, if Queen D1 and Rook G2 and is... So I think Queen E2 is the solution. Queen E2, very good, right. Okay, we move on. So the obvious move is obviously you have to take the Rook. That's fairly obvious. This is... now it's going to get harder. So what they want to do is they want to go Bishop D3 and take on H7. Now, you could muscle them somehow with, you know, muscle them with King C3. This is tricky. If King C3, there is moves like... I mean, I'm doing quite well. How many have I got wrong today? I've got 4 wrong and I've got 8 right. So I've got twice as many puzzles right that I got wrong. So going in rating. But it's tough. So if A4, okay, let's just calculate. So sometimes when you're struggling, I always feel like when you're struggling, you know, to really make sense of the position, just calculate a line. Just calculate one variation, get yourself started. Okay, A4, bishop D3, A3, bishop H7, A2, winning for black. What's wrong with that variation? A4, well, they've got other moves. That's what's wrong with it. If there's anything wrong with it, they can go bishop D3, A3, bishop B1. However, after king... okay, maybe that's the trick. If you go king B3, they can then take on H7. Very tricky, all this stuff. Also bear in mind, if you're too slow here, they might go king, they might start activating their king. I feel I must start with A4. And again, must carry on with A3. So the question is, if you go king B3, they go bishop H7. A2, they want bishop G8, king B2, bishop A2, king A2, G6, and they win actually. But after king B3, bishop H7, C5, then they have G6, right? So somehow you have to avoid them being able to take on H7. If you go king C3, they take on H7, you go A2, G6, A1, they go G7. Well, I'm not sure actually if that's even winning, because how are you going to stop? If queen b2, then it's hard to believe that's not winning. But after queen b2, king h3, how do you stop the queen? If queen a2, then king g3. So if you went king c3, they could go bishop h7, a2, g6, a1 equals queen, g7. This is actually really like a study. So what we're thinking instead is c5, because at the moment they're not threatening to take on h7 because of a2. So if you went c5, they went king g3, you went c2, they go c4, sorry, they go king f2, c3, king e3, c2, you win, right? And if c5, king g3, c4, king h4, c3, king h5, c2, bishop c2, a2, that should be winning. King, although there's king h6, queens, bishop, king takes. Probably that's winning because their g pawn is a long way from queening, and you should somehow be able to coordinate the queen and the king together to win the game. Although it's still not easy. I mean, if they get the pawn to g6, actually, they could try and set up some kind of blockade, but it's not going to be enough. So, okay, it feels like c5 is the way, because we identified a problem with king b3. So I think it's c5. Yeah. So I got that one right. And now my dreaded worst nightmare, which is the king and pawn endgame. Okay, there's two moves that I'm looking at here. One is king f4 and the other one is b5. Now my first gut instinct, I must admit, was king f4. But now I'm seeing that they could just go c6. Why am I winning after king f4, c6? If I go d5, takes, king f5, g3, e6, g2, it's not winning. So I think it might be b5. If b5... takes, king d5. I think it's b5. Oh, okay, now I'm stuck. But I could force them to give way. I could take on a6 and then go king f4. Oh, but then they'll just wait with the king, right? So their plan is to basically wait with the king and then say that I can't take on f5 because of g3. So if I go b6, there's also maybe moves like d5, but that doesn't make any sense, right? d5 doesn't make any sense. If I go b6, Maybe they could also go c5, dc, king e5, c6. I know c6 wins, right? Because if king d6, cb7, if bc6, then b7. So b6. Let's say they wait with a king, then you push with d5. But what's the difference? Say with a pawn on b6, what's the difference? So say b6, they go king d7, king f4, king e6. Why am I winning? Oh, maybe I could just go c5. Maybe the idea is eventually to go c5, and then when you go, and then go d5. And then you're going to get overwhelmed by the pawn. So I'll start with b6. No. Wow, it's all wrong. King f4 maybe. See, I told you I was bad at. I still can't get any of these right. It's really all that was. Maybe the breakthrough is d5. Take c5, and if king e5, then c6. So it's d5 is winning. Yeah, which I should have seen, really. That was, again, careless. That was poor. See, I told you. Well, you think about this. So, I know where I need to identify my weaknesses, king of pawn endgame. Ironically, I'm not even going to try this one because I guess I'd take on f4, right? I think I'll probably stop the video there. But I know what I need to work on, which is my king of pawn endgame. I'm quite happy about how it's gone today because I've gained rating. However, yeah, I've identified where. Firstly, one thing I need to do is be absolutely certain about variations. I think that's a really key part of that calculation. Is don't just guess. You know, be absolutely certain before you commit to a line. You know, we saw that was a really key variation. What was the one that we were talking about earlier? That was a really key one that I got wrong. It was this one. Where I basically, I guessed that f6 97 there would be a move, but there wasn't. And in fact, but what I've seen, rook f3, I think still, what's the difference between rook f4? Rook f4 just gives you less scope because I have queen g5, you don't have rook check. I mean, I think in a proper game, I probably would have seen rook f3 because, you know, you don't know that there's a win. So when you know that there's a win, you kind of think, it must be something simple like f6, right? But having seen knight d7, I assume that there would be some kind of refutation of knight d7. There must be something wrong with it. But ironically, there wasn't. There was nothing wrong with it. I guess knight d7, queen e3, you could just take with a pawn, for example. Like knight e6, just move your king. You know, what's the win? There's no obvious win there, right? Queen g3, king f7. You know, I suppose queen g7 in that. But then queen g7, king e6, rook e1, knight e5, for example. So I've identified something I need to work on, which is to, you know, become less guessy. And I think that's true with all, you know, I think the problem with calculation is that, you know, for all people, it's tough. You have to really grind it out. You know, and one of the issues with calculation is we have a tendency to be lazy as chess players and as people, and you have to constantly fight against that laziness. So my issue with calculation is I have a tendency to be lazy. How do I dismiss that laziness? Right, okay, thank you for watching that video. Cheers.